Hey guys, welcome back. So far in this series, I've spent a little bit of time talking about more of the practical applications of using social media for customer or other, just engagement with other people. And while that's all really helpful and things you need to know, and I'll continue on in other episodes about more of those semantics about how you use a particular tool on a daily basis. What I wanted to focus a bit on today is this idea of storytelling. You may have heard this from other public speakers out there, and what I want to kind of do, from my perspective, is break down what that means and how it can be beneficial to you. So the idea of telling a story with your social media or with marketing efforts isn't so much about I'm writing literature or I'm writing my own novel, it carries over through multiple posts. That could be an application, but for most of us who aren't writers professionally or do novelizations of topics, that's not something we're really going to dive into. The idea of storytelling is more about taking the brand that is you, like what your personal persona is online or what you want to appear as online in a very good way. Take that idea and tell that story across all the different platforms that exist. And when I say platform, I'm really meaning things like your Twitters, your LinkedIns, your personal blog, and other things like that that people in the world will see you as online. Now, what you do in person, that comes pretty natural. Who you are is who you are. What you're trying to do here is make an extension of yourself, who you are normally, using social tools. And the way you do that is kind of creating this sort of story you want to tell. You'll hear a lot of companies talk about the idea of a brand strategy, and that is a big part of this, but let's not use those words. Let's think of this as telling a story. And the reason why I want to focus on that is thinking about stories is a much easier way to wrap your head around concepts that people in marketing deal with on a daily basis. And especially if you're not in that industry and you don't live and breathe marketing, then you may not really understand that as much. I know I don't. I'm married to someone who is a really good coach for these things, but what I want to pass on to you is it doesn't have to be that complicated. So let's talk about this for a minute. What is telling a story? Telling a story is having a consistent message that you use or a consistent theme that you use in every post that you put out there. Now that could be a blog post you write, it could be a tweet you put out, a retweet you do, something you comment on LinkedIn, or other content you find from other people and post yourself. Now that's real. The content you post from other people, I think, is probably the most critical thing to keep an eye on, because when you're writing your own post, whether it's on Facebook or Instagram or LinkedIn or whatever else, you're going to typically use the words, no matter what you try to do, it's still going to sound like it comes from you. You may try to overtype it or undertype it, use too many hashtags, use verbiage that may not normally be you, but at the end of the day, it's generally still going to come across as you because you are you. That's that, and how you type and how you communicate is you. That's all about your person, and that's really good. But when you're taking other people's content and you're reposting it, which is a great thing to do, don't get me wrong, that's a fantastic thing to do. It's a great flattery for those people, and it's a really good way to start a conversation if you don't have your own content to write at that moment. But something to keep in mind when you do that is the type of content you share of other people's can have a very positive, a nominal, or a very negative impact on you. A good example of that would be somebody like me. If I posted something normally about tech or social or whatever else, you would understand that, you'd expect that that's who I typically am online. If, however, I posted on those same social networks some sort of post about the political climate in the United States today and elicited more of a intense dialogue as a result of that, that may not come across very well because that's not who I put myself out to be. Now, it's not to say that I can't do that, but you need to understand that the perspective people are going to have of you based on the posts you put out there is going to change if you start changing the theme of what you're doing. And if you're okay with that and that's your goal, fantastic, run with it. If it's not your goal, though, it's something to keep in mind anytime you post somebody else's content or really your own content. Let me give you another good example of this whole idea of storytelling. So you probably see billboards when you're running down the freeway, you would be running down the freeway, that's weird. You'd be driving down the freeway. So you're driving down Highway 101 or whatever freeway is local to you, and you see billboards. And oftentimes you don't typically pay attention to them. But if you do see billboards from a similar company in various places, pick a big company name out there that you see a billboard on a regular basis for, you would expect to see the same type of theme on each of those billboards. Here locally, where I live in Northern California, there's a dairy company that happens to have just south of me off the freeway a billboard that they change up periodically. And they always have some sort of dairy-based pun on it, and it's hilarious. They don't take themselves very seriously, and it shows in that sign, but in a very good way. It gives you a positive message. For something as simple as a dairy, it always keeps you in your mind, so anytime you see that product at the store, you're always kind of chuckling. You always have a positive vibe about them, which makes us here at my house want to buy them all the time. We buy their butter, their eggs, their their milk as well for our son for his bottles. We love it. That's what we buy. And for the most part, it's the marketing. They make us feel good about ourselves. They make us laugh. So we're more inclined to buy that product than something else that doesn't do those things. Another really good example of this, and you've probably kind of noticed it behind me here. There's some bobbleheads. If you don't see what I'm pointing at, some bobbleheads. I'm a huge Star Wars fan. I don't have a ton of the extra memorabilia here in the office with me right now, other than these bobbleheads, but I am a big Star Wars fan. And I was really nervous a few years ago when Disney bought Lucasfilm. It made me kind of worried because I've seen things that Disney did in the past that I wasn't a big fan of personally, wasn't a big customer of theirs, and I was really worried they were going to have a negative impact on what the Star Wars legacy actually had been. There had been a lot of canon and a lot of books written so far. What I realized really quickly, within a couple of years after that had happened, is their advancement on the movie front and getting new movies put out. They canceled one cartoon, but they brought in a new cartoon, which is Star Wars Rebels. And you may be asked why I'm going into the details here. Just bear with me for a second. I'm bringing this up because they started bringing out additional cartoons. Then they brought up comic books and written books, published those as audiobooks. Some of these books took place a long time before the new movies they were making. Some took place right before these movies. Some took place in the middle of these movies. The reason I bring this up is Disney and Lucas together, those two companies realized that one of the things that's very difficult to tell a story with is a movie. Now, you may think that's counterintuitive, but let me kind of explain that. Telling a story with a movie, if the movie is a standalone thing, there's no book or other literary thing that comes along with that, not a big deal. You just have a series of messages you want to convey in the movie, and that's the end of it. But when you're working off a series of books or a well-known series of stories like Star Wars, fan fiction and the fan books, written books that have been marked as canon for years and years have been around, and you have a lot of diehard fans. So how do you augment that? There is no way you could tell the nuanced stories in a movie. Regardless of whether it's an hour and a half or 2.5 hours long, there's no way. We all know that. If you've read a book or listened to an audiobook, there's things that go on people's and characters' minds. There's other subtleties that happen that you just can't convey in a movie effectively. There are some things you can do, but for the most part, those nuances you cannot carry through in a movie. A really good example of that is if you think back in the 2000s when Peter Jackson made his well-known Lord of the Rings movies. For anyone that had read the books over years, you knew that even with their extended editions, each of those movies could be 3.5 hours long, you still missed a lot of detail from the equivalent books. And it's not to say they were bad movies, everyone has their own opinion about those, but my point is there's a lot of things that story couldn't tell in that one channel. So coming back to Star Wars and the Disney-Lucas relationship here, what they obviously realized is that there's no way they could carry across their story, their message of what this universe was to look like, if they only relied on movies to do it. Because you can only release movies in certain schedules because of viewers fatigue for how many movies come out per year. So what else do? You start creating TV shows, you create comic books, you create regular books, you create action figures, all kinds of things, and you tell an overarching story. And even in this case, I'm still not really referring to the actual story of Star Wars. That could easily be supplanted in here, but I'm really referring to how they messaged the idea of what Star Wars is across a variety of mediums. They were able to keep the same message and the same continuity going through written books, audiobooks, comic books, cartoons, graphic novels, and movies. Do some movies that were from older timelines, current timelines, revamp characters, and even change the well-known canon, or by canon I mean the well-known history or legacy that was Star Wars, change a lot of those facts and kind of wipe out what we all knew and start over again, but do a really good job with it. And for you, as a really good example here, this is an idea that they've realized, we don't have to be stuck on just one medium. It isn't just that one social platform or that one written platform or that one tool that you've been using for so long. You have a bunch of different tools at your disposal these days. And what you need to do is figure out the best way that those tools can work for you. Now, I recognize that in and of itself is kind of a dodgy answer because you really in some cases could use, well, Jeff, how could I use Instagram, for example, to promote myself as a tech writer? That could be tough, right? Because that's a very visual social network. Maybe that platform doesn't work for you. Maybe a written-based platform would work for you, like a Twitter or a Facebook, potentially. And vice versa. If you are a photographer doing, posting pictures and having that sort of storyline in a more written form of social medium, like email, may not be really the good way for you to go. It's up to you to figure out those tools that make the most sense based on that. You're going to have to put a little bit of work in. You will have to look at those tools to see how they work and make a decision about the best place to go. But keep in mind always that you are trying to tell a story of the brand you. I know that sounds cheesy, I apologize. But who you are is important, and maintaining that message is very, very important and can build influencers, people who want to follow what you have to say. That's what you're trying to get to. You want to be influential with other people, so when you put something out, people want to listen to you and they want to actively engage with you. That is the end goal here, and you establish a relationship that is trusted on both sides to advance everybody and just helps out. It's really, really good. So I hope from this you kind of take the idea of what a story is. If I didn't really finish talking about it too much, I can absolutely go through things in the comments below. I'll have a blog up on my website here coming soon. Like I said, I'd love to have you guys comment below. Thumbs up and subscribe if you want to see more of this. I really hope you enjoyed today's episode on storytelling. I'll talk to you guys real soon. Have a good one. Cheers.